No one knew they needed a smartphone before iPhone made one, right? So when somebody came along and said, here's this wonderful shiny little black box, probably a piece of advice I would give to anyone starting a business is, it's good to know what you're talking about, but you don't need to be an expert in the field by any stretch of the imagination. In actual fact, sometimes it can be a strength.
Harry Cramer. This is somebody with a great work ethic who started following in his father's footsteps, who is also an entrepreneur. However, starting his own business, what do you do when you move into an industry in occupational health where those established in that sector spread the word and tell you you shouldn't be there because you're a doctor, or you build a better business? This is Harry's story. I'm Richard Osborne, and this is Drive, the small business podcast from UKBF. Harry, good to see you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you for coming in, and thank you for coming in to share your journey as I'll use the term young entrepreneur, because I'm sat in front of you and I'm feeling like I'm maybe 1 or 2 years older.
Oh, shush.
And what I think you're one of the first, just trying to think, yes, our first guest who particularly has works a specialism in and worked within occupational health. And that's, for me, a term I've heard, a term that I see used quite frequently, but don't fully understand what it actually means. What is occupational health?
Yes, you're not probably uncommon in that a lot of people, it's one of those industries, I think, perhaps a little bit like a legal industry, where you don't really know you need it until you need it, and then you don't know that much about it. So then you contract people such as us, such as occupational health companies, to help you out. At its most basic, occupational health is two things. It's health and it's occupational, which means it's health within the work setting. So traditionally, you're focusing on the impact that work has on your health, and probably more so these days, the impact that health has on your work. And really, it's everything surrounding that. Traditionally, people kind of think of occupational health as being your medicals for forklift drivers and that type of stuff. Of course, these days, it's much more comprehensive than that, particularly as mental health has become much more well understood and therefore has had a bigger impact on work and productivity. So it's become a lot broader over the more recent years. But yes, it's essentially anything to do with health in the workplace, really.
Okay, and so it's not just as simple as making sure people have ergonomic chairs to sit on. It goes far beyond that side of things. You mentioned mental health there, and you meant like forklift drivers. So I'm thinking like construction, manual work. The working environment goes further and beyond that and I'd even say, thinking about mental health, the environment we now work in sort of post-pandemic.
Very much so. And as a result of that, occupational health as a landscape has changed dramatically. So many more people are working at home, which poses its own risks. And we all have our own views on that, of course. There are complete different changes to working structures that have, in some instances they reduce the risk, in some instances they increase the risk. So you use the example of ergonomic chairs, for example, which is relatively straightforward aspect of occupational health because you're looking at somebody's posture and the way that they sit at a desk and that kind of thing, which obviously during the pandemic was different because, of course, most of us were working at home when we weren't necessarily used to it so much. Lots of us were sat at kitchen tables and that kind of thing. But also, probably more significant than that is the landscape of mental health has changed hugely. The rise in conditions such as anxiety and also the severity of the symptoms of things like anxiety has been very difficult to ignore. And it's kept people like us extremely busy. So, whilst no one ever wishes for the pandemic and, it was clearly a very, very bad thing, it has certainly had upsides for us as much as it has to many other businesses. And we've been needed more than ever, which again has been both good and bad for us, but we've certainly been kept very, very busy.
So if before we come on to your journey, just to sort of cover some of these, I'd say from an educational perspective. Now I'm Gen X. That's a new term that I've become familiar with. I'm not quite boomer, as my son likes to call me, Gen X. But this mental health landscape is new. Didn't exist when I started my working career in that sense, and it's very much I was brought up in like you suck it up sort of environment. If I go to, I'm almost going to sound like a Piers Morgan here, but the other end of the spectrum, where you hear of people taking mental health days off work, is that normal now? Or is, where is there a sort of a line along there? What is mental health from an employer's perspective?
Oh, that's a big question, that. It's a very good question as well. And you alluded to the fact that when you were probably younger, mental health wasn't really a thing. Well, of course it was a thing. It was just a much less popularised and a much less well understood thing. And in these days, of course, quite rightly, mental health is much better researched, much better understood, and subsequently much better managed, in fact. So how is it different? How does it look now? And what impact does that have on employers? Well, with it being better understood, it means that there is more that can be done. There's more support that can be offered. There's more help that can be offered. It can improve people's general work output. It can improve people's general quality of life. And employers can have a massive part of that. They can't necessarily do that completely by themselves, which is why companies like us exist. But they certainly can influence that for the better. And that's obviously a very, very good thing. It is a spectrum, and you can go too far, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But nevertheless, it is a very important step that we've taken over the last 20, 30 years to have better understood mental health. And from an employer's perspective, because, we're sat here talking about UK business forums, and so we're really talking about from an employer's perspective. The fact that mental health is better understood is a little bit scary, because exactly as you allude to, people talk about their mental health in work, and they'll take mental health days, and it's almost seen as being a little bit fashionable, whereas in the old days it was perhaps stigmatized the other way. And subsequently, employers can feel quite pressurized to be understanding and diligent and careful and cautious when it comes to managing employees who suffer with mental health conditions. And, to a certain extent, rightly so, but also to a certain extent, that is kind of part of the problem in itself, because mental health is no different from physical health. It is health. And it's on a spectrum, and some people have very good mental health, some people have very bad mental health, some people are somewhere in the middle. Most of us are somewhere in the middle. So from an employer's perspective, it's not necessarily something to be afraid of, and that's quite an important barrier to break down, which I feel still has a little bit of work to go. And with the help of companies such as occupational health companies, or indeed sort of corporate wellbeing style companies, employers have a lot more tools in their toolkit to try and support employees and ensure that they are consistently healthy, mentally well supported and fit for work.
It sounds to me that it's almost subjective though, in that now I'm, as an individual, very familiar with neurodiversity. So I'm asking questions from a cynical perspective, but in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, I'm aware of this because I work with and support special needs schools. I work with neurodiversity from that perspective, and these are very often non-visible environments. But anyway, from an employer, you could sit there and think, right, I've got member of staff has broke their leg. Literally, they broke their leg. You look at it, they can't walk. That person who's a delivery driver isn't going to be able to make that delivery because they physically can't push the accelerator down on their car. However, if you go to a far end of the spectrum relating to mental health, I can't come into work today. I'm feeling anxious. So I'm going to take a mental health day. At that point, how do you quantify that from an employer's perspective, in the sense of, is it quite literally subjective in that point, and you just, that's it? Or because you can't turn around and say, well, show me your brain. Yeah, I can see those neurons sparking. Yeah, you're definitely having too high a level of anxiety to be able to do that delivery run today.
Well, yes, exactly that. And physical health is very easy to understand, because exactly as you say, if someone breaks their leg, it's very clear that their leg is broken. It's also quite clear to understand what they can and can't do with that leg. Yeah. They probably can't go and play football. They probably still can work from home with a little bit of leg support or whatever it might be. Mental health's a lot more difficult to understand. And exactly as you say, it can be at times difficult to measure. Not impossible, but it can be difficult to measure. The key in my view, and I'm not, this is very much my opinion and probably shared across some of the professionals in the industry, but you've got to be very cautious when it comes to putting labels on things. Ironically, I studied psychology at university, and psychology as a profession is all about putting labels on things. And I really, really disagreed with that. And it's why I actually didn't necessarily pursue the career that perhaps I once intended to, because I do feel like you can be trying to put everything in a box is a very dangerous thing to do. Really, you're looking at functional ability, which essentially is boiling down to somebody's symptoms. Symptoms can be variable. There can be patterns to them. They can be ad hoc. They can be one-off. They can be situational. So let's say, for example, somebody suffers a bereavement. They've had a very sad, very traumatic life event. And as a result, they have a short or medium-term period of low mood, perhaps depressive type symptoms. That would be very different, although you might still potentially categorise that as depression. That would be very different from somebody who's had a lifelong depressive disorder and has peaks and troughs of mood consistently for their entire life. You might necessarily label them both the same, but in actual fact, the symptoms and also their functional ability is very different. And also the way in which you as an employer might manage them would be very different. So we're not necessarily focusing on exactly what label somebody's got. We're not necessarily focusing just on how they would describe their life, their situation. We're also looking at their functional ability. So what does their set of symptoms that they're suffering from currently mean in terms of their output and what their functioning is at work? So your member of staff that you're referring to, or this hypothetical member of staff who's phoned you and said that they're feeling anxious and they'd like to take the day off work or whatever. Anxiety is a very, very complicated term for different symptoms, and it can mean different things to different people. It is technically it is a disorder in its own right. It's classified under the DSM, but different people experience anxiety differently. You might have sweaty palms. You might struggle to sleep. You might struggle with breathing. You might have heart palpitations. You might struggle to speak properly. You might speak very quickly, you might speak very slowly. It means so many different things to different people. So what you're looking at is, A, what does that look like in terms of their job? So what can they do, what can't they do, what can you help them to do? And B, what does it look like in terms of their kind of future employment with you, and in what way can you support that going forward? That doesn't mean that you need to indefinitely give them all adjustments under the sun. That's a common misconception for mental health. Managers in particular can be quite fearful of it and say, oh, somebody's suffering from a mental health condition, give them everything they want. That's exactly the opposite of what's productive, actually. But you might need to understand what their symptoms are and in what way you can help that particular person. There are inherent problems with that as well, and you've sort of alluded to it in your cynicism, and you're quite right to do so, which is that when something's difficult to measure, you can't take an X-ray on the brain to see whether someone's got anxiety. It's also very easy to exaggerate, and in doing so, unfortunately, mental health can be used as an excuse from time to time, when in actual fact, anxiety is a perfect example that you've already referenced. In actual fact, being at work is good for you. That's proven. There's multiple forms of research that show that being at work is good for you, particularly with conditions such as anxiety. So yes, taking a couple of days off might be helpful to get things back under control, but a long-term absence is probably not going to be helpful in that instance. So again, this kind of stereotype of if someone says mental health, you've got to back off and leave them be and let them have as much time off work as they want is actually quite a bad way of managing a situation. And that's what occupational health is for. We're there to help
And
managers.
we've probably seen a big part of that post-pandemic, with everybody being remote, away from colleagues, away from family as well, in very isolated environments for a couple of years, coming back out into post-pandemic #normal world. All of the social skills and social confidences that people have had pre-pandemic have dwindled away. And then there's also a whole generation, in my view, who have missed a lot of emotional development that would normally happen during normal day-to-day working life, socialising. They've missed that mental development, social development, and are now suffering off the back of it.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This indefinite work from home culture is dangerous. Yeah. That's not to say you should never work from home. We all find working from home very helpful from time to time. It's obviously very convenient as well. No commutes, no being stuck in the traffic. You can get out of bed a little bit later and probably go to bed a little bit earlier. And there's lots and lots of logistical reasons that working from home can be good, but it can also be very concerning and socially extremely isolating. Some people thrive in that. Some people struggle in that. Nobody really will that be a healthy solution for indefinitely, because humans are social creatures, and companies, the very definition of the word company means a group of people. So it's very difficult to have a group of people remotely. Clearly it's much easier than it used to be, but it's still not fully possible. So yeah, it's something that I would always exercise caution in when it comes to building a company and a community, is that fully remote probably isn't a sustainable answer, in my view.
So moving on to yourself, one of the things I found interesting about you is your work ethic and your sort of, just work ethic and a way and approach to getting out there is something that seems to be instilled into you from a very young age. And your father ran his own business. Was he running his own business whilst you was very young as well?
There's an interesting story. So my dad ran businesses before I was born and when I was very young, but my parents are separated when I was 11 months old. So despite my dad being very busy and working a lot, I didn't know him all that well as a youngster. And I didn't really fully get to know him. I've always known him, but I never really got sort of very, very close to him until I was in my teens. So I grew up with a single mum. I'm an only child, so I grew up with a single mum. So it was me and my mum for a lot of my life. And I think that probably, yes, I've always had a very strong work ethic, and I think that might be a big part of where it comes from, because I was very fortunate insofar as I went to a private school when I was young, and probably the default position that a lot of people will assume is, okay, then that comes from a lot of wealth and a lot of background. My accent probably doesn't help with that as well. The truth is we didn't come from any money at all. So my mum used to work and manage 3 or 4 clothes shops when I was younger, and she used to work 6 or 7 days a week in order to try and fund me going to school. So I, from a very young age, watched people around me, my mum in particular, working very hard and getting output for that. So from a very young age, I kind of learned that working hard was a very good life choice. And
so that's an interesting dynamic then. So as a young person, young lad growing up with a clearly entrepreneurial father, but estranged, that you I'm assuming then didn't have much contact with, by the fact you said didn't really know him until your teens. So I'm thinking like the young sort of 9, 10, 11-year-old gap where you first started earning a living. But familiar, single mum, upbringing, 3 boys. From my own experience, a single mum is extremely hardworking. Then it sounds like the work ethic of that part came more from your mother's side, and seeing her commitment to that and her commitment towards providing for you and providing the best education for you. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think both my parents have worked hard, but I would probably say of the two, I have lots of weaknesses, but I think two qualities I probably have that I work quite hard, and I've probably got a flair for business. And I think that the hard working diligence comes from my mum's side, and probably the entrepreneurial flair, dare I say it, probably comes from my father's side. Probably a little bit more of a nature rather than a nurture factor, I suspect.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and the interesting to see, because two parents make one child, and seeing how sort of what inherit from there, because you're looking at your first job effectively mopping shop floors.
Indeed, yes. Down
At a
Pescott
very young
Street in
age.
Windsor.
Yeah, so very young age, you're out there earning some pennies already. Was that self-motivated?
Entirely self-motivated, yeah, and actually quite well paying.
Yeah.
To this day, I think it's probably still per hour the best paid job I've ever had. Because I used to go up and down Pescott Street on a Saturday, mopping shop floors for £5 a shop floor, and it used to take me about 15 minutes. So it was about £20 an hour, which is not bad for a 12-year-old. I reinvested in it, and I bought a bigger mop and a bigger bucket so I could do shop floors a bit faster. And I think probably my career was born from there.
Yeah. So I didn't appreciate that part. So when you just said reinvested mop and bucket, was these literally effectively self-employed in that age? Because I assumed you went and got a part-time job employed by the retailers.
No, did it all myself. So I learnt that shops have, I don't know if it's still the same, probably isn't still the same, but they used to have petty cash boxes, little floats.
The good old days.
The good old days, yeah. And in them, there would be usually about 20 or 30 quid that they'd use for, buying loo rolls or whatever it is that they needed. And there was always a fiver to spare to have their shop floor cleaned. So I made sure I was the one who got that fiver. So yes, it was entirely self-employed. I went to go and I borrowed a mop and bucket from the house. Yeah. And then that quickly broke because it wasn't really meant to do all that much work. So with all the fivers that I earned, I went and bought a bigger one.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not appreciate it was self-employed. So that's even sort of more inspiring in that level, that young age, you're effectively, dare we say, running your own business and reinvesting in it. You then, when you started moving and working within retail, Fat Face worked within there, presumably that was where you was first time on PAYE for all intensive purposes, and working in retail, dealing at a young age, at the age of 14, dealing with customers face on.
Yeah, which was different and very, very helpful. And, I learnt skills in that at the age of 14 that I still use to this day, which is selling, really. And organisation, things like you learn how to have a till system that will tell you what you'd bought and then go and restock the shelves using, they probably still work the same way to this day, I expect. But, without knowing, I learnt quite a lot about the world of business at the time. You don't really appreciate that at the time. It's just a job, isn't it? But yeah, I did that for 3 years, I think it was. I later found out I shouldn't have actually been doing it because I wasn't insured between the age of 14 and 16, but they never told me about that at the time. Sorry if I'm getting Fat Face in trouble.
Years gone. There'll be no evidence now. It's something which I would always encourage. For me, I mean, my wife always worked in retail, and then she started her own market stall, and I used to work for her at weekends. The skills you learn in a retail environment or market environment are invaluable in I personally feel, in any sort of business environment when you're dealing with so many different characters. You learn those communication skills, social skills like we were touching on earlier, that I'd encourage anybody at a young age, if you can go and get a job working in a customer-facing environment, do it, because it's the skills you learn see you through life all the way through.
Yeah, and I think if if I were to probably pinpoint it to one thing and said what's the single most valuable thing that I learned whilst working there, particularly when it comes to sort of selling and interaction with people, I think it was about authenticity. Because there's the old cliche of selling, isn't there? There's sort of two types of salesmen. I think there's the used car salesman that will tell you anything they need to get the sale. Yeah. And then there's the probably slightly more scientific salesperson who actually identifies what the person would like and tries to match a product, solution, service, whatever it is accordingly. And I would probably try and put myself in the latter category. I've always strived really hard to be honest, and subsequently as authentic as I can be, and therefore never be afraid to sort of say to somebody, you know, this goes back to when they were trying clothes on, never be afraid to say to somebody, that's too big, that's too small, that's not the right colour for you, which got me in trouble once or twice, but I would rather have it that way and know that the customer was going away feeling that they'd bought something that was good for them and made them look nice. So that was an approach that I learnt that way, and it carries through the very DNA of the company that I run to this day, is that we are 100% honest about everything we ever do. We're authentic, we're genuine, and I really believe that's the way to operate. And if we make a mistake, we put our hands up, and if we do something well, we'll tell people that we've done something well, and everything in between. So I think that's probably one of the biggest skills that I've learned when it comes to customer interaction, is that authenticity.
Okay. You then had a bit of a change in career, so I'm not seeing the link here, so talk us through it. From retail, you can, when somebody's of a young age or at school age, you said, you know, going and working at a restaurant, bar, retail, those sort of they're the kind of jobs that people of that age, they tend to take. They're easy to take, they're flexible hours, short hours, it fits around school, makes sense. You then went into go-karting.
Yeah.
So what was that career choice for? Well, why?
I mean, I wouldn't have called it a career choice at the time, but I look back on it and think actually it was an incredibly important career choice that I made. So I mentioned I was working in Windsor, because it's in and around where I grew up, and then my mum moved up north to County Durham, and therefore I moved up with her eventually. So I was looking for other jobs. I've always been a massive motorsport enthusiast, still am. I race cars to this day. And as a kid, I used to follow Formula One. I still remember Damon Hill winning the championship in 1996, and have followed as much of motorsport ever since and got involved wherever I could do. And where we moved to was about 45 minutes from quite a significant go-kart track in the UK. It's called Karting North East for anyone who knows it. Some people know it as Warden Law as well. I'd well recommend it, by the way, great place. And I found that was close by and thought, hold on, rather than earning whatever it was, £4 an hour to work in a shop, I might be able to earn the same doing something that I love, which is being in and around motorsport. So I sent them a copy of my CV. The owner phoned me that same afternoon and said, can I come in for an interview the next day? It was clear I was very passionate about it. I'd done a lot of go-karting myself, and got a job at a go-kart track, which was, for a 17-year-old, so much fun.
I imagine, I'm by no means expert or anything, but I've done go-karting a few times. I'm a motorcyclist, so the two go together really well. And the adrenaline and buzz, how I tend to do okay at go-karting is I find the fastest person on the track, and I stick to their backside. And if they manage to get around that corner, I know I will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing that for a good while, which was at times, it was brilliant fun. At times it was exhausting, and at times it was a bit nerve-wracking as well, because I'd gone from, you can tell from my accent, that people can have certain stereotypes about me, and I went to go and work in Sunderland, working at a go-kart track, which means you're dealing with a lot of stag do's, a lot of people who are there just to have fun and don't want little posh Harry telling them what to do while they're there. So that was quite the experience. And going back to the sort of the social communication and things that we were talking about a minute ago, I learned a lot that way as well, because I was dealing with very different people in a very different way with a very different objective as well. You know, essentially it's all about safety. It's ensuring that people don't crash into each other and die, really, a lot of the time. So trying to teach a semi-drunk bunch of stag do goers that they probably need to ease up a little bit at the age of 17 was quite the experience. But it went quite well. And I got promoted and I became a manager of that circuit by the time I was 18. They had 4 managers, of which I was one. And couldn't help but let my kind of business interests get involved in that as well. And I started on the side, a little bit naughty probably, buying and selling go-kart bits, go-karts themselves. Got a trailer hitched to the back of my car and I used to drive up and down the country selling stuff. That morphed into actually running my own go-karting team. So I got a bigger trailer, great big box trailer. Again, I probably shouldn't have been doing that, but I did. And I was going up and down the country, hiring out carts and mechanicking for people and doing instruction for people and all sorts, and ran my own go-kart team for 2 or 3 years, which again, awesome fun. Very hard work, but awesome fun.
Yeah. So that whilst you was working at the go-kart track, you was doing this on the side. Did it stay on the side, or did it become a fully fledged business?
No, it became a fully fledged business. I was also at university at the time as well, so I didn't do a lot of studying, if I'm honest. I was much more interested by work and business and things than I was going to lectures. But yeah, no, it became its own fully fledged business, and yeah, it very much had its own legs. I employed a couple of people at the age of 18, 19. Yeah, and we were away really.
So what happened then? Well, why is it not here now?
Well, 2 things. Firstly, the business was called H-Kart, H as in Harry and then Kart, and we got offered to have the domain name, which was hkart.com, bought by Hong Kong Art.
Okay.
HK Art.
So you had the domain name and somebody offered to buy the domain name.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
And I got a reasonable offer for it. You know, at the time it was a few £1,000s, which was quite a lot of money to me back then. And so I sold the domain name, and it was about the same time I was graduating from university and thought this probably is not going to be the thing that makes it big for me. So I sort of phased that out a little bit and went back into the world of getting a proper job for a few years before I kind of restarted on the entrepreneurial journey.
So the go-kart team and the parts, that type of business, nothing dramatic happened, it just literally fizzled out.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much, which I was quite sad about and quite sorry about, but I wanted to pursue other things, I guess, at the time.
Okay. And when you say other things, effectively you studied psychology, which I find is a fascinating subject just in itself, and could do a whole podcast on just chatting about psychology of behaviour. And then you went into recruitment though. So that seems like, from the outside, really like something you're passionate about and like absolute like adrenaline junkie kind of career to recruitment.
Marketing it was actually.
Marketing.
It was marketing for a recruitment company.
Okay. Did you enjoy it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always sort of had 2 passions, and to this day that is completely mirrored by what my career choices are now: motorsport and mental health. Hence studying psychology, but also running a motorsport business. And really, basically, I do the same now, to be honest. So I studied psychology at university because I was interested in mental health and behaviour and, you know, what people do and why they do it, I suppose. And I thought quite a good way of sort of marrying that into a business world was to go into marketing and study kind of people's behaviour and matching products and services and building websites and customer experiences accordingly.
Talk me through where that link is then. So when you look at, I can see the psychology aspect of it, in that you're trying to, dare I say, influence behaviour. Marketing is trying to influence somebody's behaviour. So understanding the psychology of somebody's behaviour makes sense. But where does the mental health aspect of that come in?
Well, it didn't really, not to start off with. And that's probably why I came back into the world of mental health, because I missed it. Really, I was trying to look at how I could use psychology in a corporate world, which I did, to be fair, and used it quite a lot, and it was very interesting. So it was about that. But yeah, the mental health thing fell by the wayside for a few years, and I missed it. And as we often do, I had a bit of a realization that I probably wasn't completely being authentic to my own aspirations in life, which is helping people probably a bit more. And so I kind of moved back into that world.
Okay, and that was supporting your dad's business for a bit.
Yeah, so whilst I was working marketing for this, it was an oil and gas recruitment company. It was whilst I was working for that business, my dad ran an insurance company, and he used to outsource his occupational health usage to another big company. I won't name them on this podcast, but a big occupational health business, and he just, as someone who had a bit of knowledge of kind of mental health and psychology and things, he asked me just to have a bit of a look at the contract and see what I thought of it. And the truth was, I thought it was a bit rubbish what he was getting, and certainly what he was paying for it as well. And he was paying pretty substantial. It was a lot of money for what he was doing. So I said, "Do you want me to have a bit of a look around and see if I can find something a little bit better for you?" I said, "Yeah, of course, if you don't mind." So I did a bit of research, started to learn a bit about the world of occupational health. Bear in mind, I've got no experience of occupational health at this point, and I think I'm 24 at this stage.
So I'm trying to think, that's quite a leap of faith from your father to put that onto you to review this if you haven't got that industry knowledge. You've got a bit of an understanding from what I'm interpreting, but it doesn't sound like, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you're not an expert in that field at that point in time where you've been asked.
I'm not really I'm not an expert in anything. I mean, who is at the age of 24? But I'm certainly, I have no knowledge whatsoever of occupational health. Reasonable knowledge of mental health, a basic knowledge of physical health, a reasonable knowledge of marketing and consumerism, and that's about it really. So yeah, it was a big leap of faith, and I enjoyed the challenge. Yeah. Just spent a bit of time learning about as much as I could about occupational health, and really realised that there wasn't anything out there that was great or fit for purpose or just particularly usable.
So what was the outcome of that research?
This probably doesn't make me look great, because it probably makes me sound a little bit big-headed, but I kind of looked at it and thought, do you know what? I reckon I could probably do this better. So I did. And that was literally the premise on which Smart Clinic was born, which was looking at the fact that there was an industry full of businesses doing something, but also full of a lot of potential customers who probably wanted something a bit different to what they were getting. I thought, well, I see a big hole there, so let's try and fill that hole.
I wouldn't say it's big-headed, because you have some people who will see a problem and complain about it, and then there are other people who will see a problem and think, I could do something with this, I can solve that. And that's what differentiates people, personal opinion here, between those who will create a business and go and do something for it, and those who don't. So if you step aside from, take the point, the bit your dad asked you to look into something, put that to one side, and actually what you did was market research. Every good business, when you go into a venture, whether it's like what we're doing within our business and diversifying, you do market research, you analyse what's out there, you look at the competitor analysis, you do all that. Or you're starting a business from scratch and you're doing some of your business planning, you do your competitor research, you do analysis, you find the holes in what there is and opportunities, and you do them. So picking up on your comment just a moment ago, you did no different than that. Thank you.
That probably comes from a fellow business owner and founder. I expect hopefully maybe you recognise a little bit of that in yourself, because you've probably done the same thing on your business journey. I'm just think I know, because I have quite a lot of experience of this in the last 7 or 8 years. There are also other competitors who will look at us and say, he doesn't know anything about what he's doing. He started it with no knowledge. He's not a doctor. Most founders of such businesses are doctors, by the way. I'm not. and say, well, how can you possibly run a successful business in an industry that, you know, at the time didn't know that much about, and you're certainly not a qualified clinician? Well, the answer is, well, I am doing so. There is another way.
I'm smiling because my very first proper business was a web design company, and my first order was delivered with me a book I bought off Amazon, how to design websites. I was doing that and learning as I started it.
Excellent.
My second major business, Quick Formations, which I grew and sold and did really well out of, and a lot of what you see around you was built off the back of that business. My accountant told me I shouldn't be in the industry. The major competitor in the industry said, "You're not a lawyer. You shouldn't be doing this. This is legal services." I learned what I needed to learn. Ironically, I also studied and did the course to be a legal exec. That's not out there or anything like that. I did gain the knowledge I need to. But you're an example. I have my own experience of being in industries where people have said you shouldn't be in this industry, yet run them successfully, sold those businesses and done all right out of them. You need to know two things. In fact, the lawyer who ran the course for legal execs actually put it best. He said, no lawyer knows everything, but the good lawyers know where to go and where to look to get the knowledge that they don't have. And that goes for any business. As long as you surround yourself with people who have the knowledge that you need, the business needs, the founder doesn't need to know everything. And if anything, I'd say the founder shouldn't know everything.
Well, firstly, good for you for ignoring the people that said you shouldn't be in the industry, because you seem to have done pretty well. So you were probably, with hindsight, you certainly did something right there. I think there's a huge power to being naive when you come into an industry. Yes. I'm not saying it's the only way, because clearly, and I know from listening to your podcast that you've had lots of founders on here who are experts in their field. I'm not. I'm quite knowledgeable about it these days, but at the time I certainly wasn't. And I think there's a huge power to being naive in an industry that you're entering into, because you look at things slightly differently, and you're almost more batting for the customer than you are the provider. If I had worked for 20 other occupational health businesses through my career, I'd probably be burdened with this is how it works and this is therefore how we need to work it. Yeah. I wasn't. For better or for worse, and don't get me wrong, I've made lots of mistakes along the way, and there are lots of instances where I thought, I wish I'd have known that beforehand, I really do. And I'm sure we have customers who in the past say that we've made mistakes and said, well, maybe you don't know what you're doing. But there's also huge power in that, because you can actually look at the problem from a customer's point of view and say, never mind what other people do, never mind what other businesses do, what do you need? And let's try and build a solution around that. And there's a huge power to that. No one knew they needed a smartphone before iPhone made one, right? So when somebody came along and said, here's this wonderful, shiny little black box that does all of these things you needed to, everyone loved it. But no one knew they needed that beforehand. And everyone who built phones prior to that date will say, no, a phone has to have 9 numbers on it and all that stuff. So there are 2 ways to do things. And I'm not saying that ours is the only way, but it certainly is a way. So I think probably a piece of advice I would give to anyone starting a business is it's good to know what you're talking about, but you don't need to be an expert in the field by any stretch of the imagination. In actual fact, sometimes it can be a strength, looking at things with a fresh pair of eyes, which is what we were able to do. So we weren't burdened with this is how it's always been done. And to this day, we're very, very different from a lot of other companies. For better or for worse, we're very different, and we do things differently, and we structure our services differently and our products differently, and we have different systems and all of that. And dare I say, it's gone pretty well.
Yeah, good. And when we're talking about how it's gone very well, if we go to those early days then, the earliest days of a business, particularly the first few years, are the most challenging. They're kind of like the make or break.
Yeah.
Generally, if you get through your first 5 years, you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
So how were your first few years?
Scary. Quite intimidating. And that probably is I think there are 2 things that I did that made it even more intimidating. Firstly was I went into an industry I didn't know that much about, as we've just talked about. And secondly, I started the business quite young. I was 24 when I started Smart Clinic, which in an industry dominated by people who have been running businesses for 25 years and are probably doctors is quite intimidating. And a funny story, but I always used to try and grow a beard to make myself look older. So whenever I'd attend meetings, I'd always go to a meeting with a beard. I even once actually brought my dad along to a meeting with me just because he looked a bit older than me and therefore potentially commanded a bit more respect. In hindsight, bit of a silly thing to do, really, because you got back yourself. But at the time, you have question marks over your own ability and how seriously you're going to get taken at the age of 24, 25. But as time goes by, you believe in yourself a little bit more. You have proof of concept. We were talking before we came on air a little bit about your proof of concept for this podcast. We had our proof of concept. We trialed it with a couple of clients. We tweaked things as we went along, and effectively we spent the first 3 years proving the concept and building the foundations of what we've got. We spent an inordinate amount of time and money building a system, which at the time, every day I'd ask myself, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself in this position? My goodness, sleepless nights and things. But I look back at it now and think that was probably the best decision I made, was to build our own system rather than start buying off the shelf solutions and bending them into shape and things.
That's quite a big step for a startup.
Yeah, it was. It was our single biggest investment, was that. And it was a risky one because we had nothing and we'd spent many tens of thousands, probably, dare I say it, hundreds of thousands over the years building a system. But I would say it's probably one of our greatest strengths. I'm giving away some of our secrets here, but it's probably one of our greatest strengths these days. So it was a good decision, but it was a risky one. But yeah, the first few years were exciting, difficult. Things do get easier, don't they?
Yeah. So what was the point where you felt things start to get easier then? So those first few years, it's almost like, have you ever seen the film The Money Pit? Where you're throwing money at something, hoping it's going to pay off in the long run. And I love the story you just mentioned about going to a meeting with your dad and growing a beard, things just to try and look older. Little story, I don't think I've ever shared this actually.
Reveal your secrets, go on.
Story. When I first started the quick formations business, there was an industry meeting where a lot of people in the industry were going for a meeting. And I was living in a small 2 up, 2 down with my wife, loads of debt. And we had a little Nova, or of course a beaten up old car anyway, and I didn't want to look like I didn't belong there because people were telling me I shouldn't be in that industry. So a friend of mine had a Porsche Boxster, and I borrowed his Porsche and sort of put on a cheap suit to go to the meeting so that people would see me pull up in a Porsche and think, yeah, I belong here, sort of thing. I think we've all done it. It's the fear of not fitting in an environment where you put everybody else around you on pedestals. You said you've got to back yourself. Somebody else has used that analogy as well, I've seen before. It's so true. Yeah.
And it's funny you talk about that story about the car as well, because of course you might look at that on hindsight and think, actually, I'm possibly portraying the wrong message there, because I'm actually, if I turn up at a young age in an inordinately expensive car, a client might look at you and say, well, all of my profits are going into his fuel tank. So
you look back, I do look back at it and think, who cares? Like for me now, the age I am is like, I know I wouldn't judge somebody from that, but going back 25-ish years, probably about 25 years, I was in my 20s. I was worried people would judge me.
And I would also hope that, I think the world has probably moved on a little bit from some of those stereotypes as well. You know, we don't all go to meetings in suits anymore to look serious, do we? You know, we don't. It is a little
high tattoos 25 years ago.
Exactly. Well, exactly. And these days, actually, you know, it's a good talking point in a meeting, isn't it? You know, I do think the world has moved on a little bit, and I do think I suppose entrepreneurialism is celebrated a little bit more than it used to be, and therefore I think people are a bit more forgiving of those who are giving it a go. But nevertheless, you know, particularly in an industry like ours where you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with people's health, there is an area of you've got to be fairly respectable. You've got to be taken seriously to be taken seriously. So, yeah, I think things have got better in that regard. But yeah, I mean, you still want to try and be taken fairly seriously, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned a comment that the COVID pandemic impacted the business in an interesting way. What do you mean by interesting way?
Well, so I mentioned earlier about how we do things a bit differently from some other organisations, and I'll give you an example of that. Most people, occupational health is generally a price per hour industry, a little bit like law. And my view is that clients don't really want that. Clients don't really like the pay per hour model because it's very difficult to obtain an exact quote. It's a little bit it feels a bit difficult saying, I know I'm paying £60 or £100 per hour for a service, because you think, oh, that's really quite a lot of money. You start to dress it up in this kind of subscription-based model, and all of a sudden you're not paying per hour, you're paying for a year or a month or whatever your subscription base is. As a business, I also think that's quite a good model because you're earning income in your sleep. So any kind of pay per hour model, you're limited by how many hours there are in a day. Any kind of subscription model, you're limited by how many clients you can actually sign up to said subscription. So I recognise that would be quite a good way to go for us, or I hoped it would be quite a good way to go for us. Similarly, in doing so, you can also add a lot of extra stuff into your service that clients would get, and therefore it goes from being a fairly transactional occupational health assessment type service to a slightly more rounded wellbeing type service where clients will pay an annual fee and all of their staff will get access to something, counselling.
There's a very good business aspect to that model as well.
Yeah.
Quoted by previous guest in this podcast, Dwayne Jackson, where if you're charging people a monthly fee, if your service goes wrong or becomes difficult to deliver, I'm rewording to make it more relevant to like your model here, but basically, if your service becomes over complex, difficult to deliver, that then becomes a significant cost to you. So it's actually better for the customer because it pushes you to deliver a optimal, efficient service to them, because that makes it more profitable for you. So it drives a win-win situation.
I agree. And it helps a lot with engagement and therefore renewal as well. You know, a client is only worth what they're worth to you at that time, and what that time is depends on how long they're with you. So clearly renewals, also cost of acquisition, you know, goes down dramatically if somebody's with you for a long time. And a subscription model, you know, it's been proven many times that subscription models have much higher retention rates than sort of pay-as-you-go style models. So we want to partner with clients. We're not really interested in a client who's going to use us once and then disappear into the ether. We want to work with a client for 10 years because it's better for them as well. You know, I'm all about building a service that is optimal for the client. So if a client works with us for a long time, they're going to get a better service from us. As would be the case with any relationship-based service. You know, I go back to the example with law. If you use the same lawyer for 5 or 10 years, they know your business and your way of working inside out. If you use them once to do one basic bit of work for you and then never hear from them again, it's probably going to be a fairly transactional approach. So we went with that style of working, which at the time, no other business in our industry did. To this day, I only know of one other who does, and they are a very large company and they completely and utterly copied our model, which, well, I'm sure there's an expression about that, isn't it?
Great form of flattery.
Great form of flattery, exactly. Frustrating at times, but also flattering at times, particularly given they're like 10 times the size of us. So that was the upside. The downside is a pandemic hits. And when a pandemic hits and you're an organisation that offers health services of any kind to people, your usage goes up a lot, but your income doesn't, because your people are paying for a year or a month or 2 years or whatever the length of time is. So our income stayed the exact same, but our usage went through the roof, which we all did what we could, didn't we, in the pandemic to try and ensure that our business was sustainable. Some of us lost quite a lot, some of us earned quite a lot, some of us stayed somewhere in the middle. We gained plenty of clients through it, but our profitability and GP, as many would call it, or net margins went down quite dramatically because, of course, we were delivering a much higher, more comprehensive service for the same price. So that was a very interesting concept, and it was very, very frightening times for us as an organisation because of our approach. So I'm sure there would have been others in the industry laughing at us at the time, saying, "Well, they're a bit stuffed now, aren't they? I bet they wish they'd done what we did." But the big but to all of this is we took the longer term view on it, which was that if we work tirelessly now to ensure that our service levels remain just as good, if not better, during the pandemic, regardless of what it's going to cost us, these clients will be pleased with us, they'll remember us, they'll stay with us, and they'll tell their friends. And they did. Yeah. So yes, it was a difficult year. Yes, it was financially very worrying, but not only have we lived to tell the tale, subsequently we've actually thrived. And that's not necessarily as a direct result of the pandemic. It's more through word of mouth and feedback, and our general reputation being very high.
And as you came out of the pandemic, or two things, so just a general statement really, I know some business owners whose companies got right to the brink of breaking, where it was, are they going to survive or not? And the general feeling against so many people that I've spoken to is, if we get through this and we survive this, we'll come out so much stronger. Yeah. And from what you just said there yourself, you did, but not just that, you came out of it stronger and acquired another business.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, that was end of 2022, so quite fairly recently. Well, we came out stronger because our reputation went up. You can see from just Googling us that our reputation is high, our feedback is very good. We're not perfect, nobody's perfect. There's definitely room for improvement, and we continue to try and improve every day, but the service that we do deliver is very, very good, and people do tell their friends. It's particularly with small businesses, or small to medium businesses, people do tell their friends. And I think, just to go back to your point about how many businesses were on the brink of, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but how many businesses were on the brink of kind of breaking during the pandemic, because a lot of that would have been people who are right at the capacity for cash flow. A lot of that would have been just their business just went through the floor. And I think one of the reasons I'm proud to be here today, for example, and one of the reasons that I try and support sort of the UK business forums, is because I think there's a massive celebration to be had for small and medium businesses, because every single business who survived the pandemic is heroic, because they have been through challenges that the big businesses didn't have. Frankly, the big companies of this world, let's not name any names, but the really large corporates of this world, it was a little dent in their cash flow for a year. The small and medium enterprises, potentially they weren't going to be able to feed their kids. So if they came out of it, even existing, let alone stronger for it, pat on the back for them. So every single member of your forums, particularly those who who existed pre-2020, does deserve that celebration. So I think it's a massive accolade to the UK economy and the small businesses that make up that economy.
Absolutely.
And that wasn't the question you asked me. You asked me about the acquisition. So yeah, we bought another small occupational health organisation at the end of 2022, which was a great experience for me personally, because it's the first time I've ever bought a business. I've worked for companies that have acquired other companies, but I've never done it myself. So that was brilliant fun. They're only very small. It was a 3 or 4 person business, but we took them on, and that was very, very exciting. Good learning experience, for better and for worse. But there we go.
Yeah, You've gone through that acquisition. You're at a stage. You clearly talk very passionate about what you do, and sort of tying that in with your comment of what you just said about small businesses. I mean, that's why this podcast exists. When people ask me, you know, in fact, actually, a colleague turned around and said about, you know, talk about these big celebrities and people tap in, and my feedback was, you could be standing in the queue of Tesco's, and the person in front of you could be a small business owner who's in that very situation you described there. You know, am I going to be able to feed my family? We're in that sort of stage here. It is so much more personal at that sort of level when you are running a small business, and you live through it compared to being a corporate where a lot of the decisions are based on spreadsheets, to use an analogy. So having gone through this journey, gone through those commitment in the early days of just naivety into like, we're going to build this, it's going to be all right. Going through the pandemic, as you just described, and just hanging on during that. We've come out of that, you've acquired a business now. You're sort of, yes, it may be only you've acquired a small business, but you've acquired a business, you're growing the team and you're building the business up. Where do you see the next few years going for what you're doing?
Yeah, there's a good question as well. So I think we continue along the philosophy of ignore what everybody else is doing and listen to what the client needs, or at least try and preempt what the client needs. We do limited market research in terms of asking what the client needs, but we also try and invent solutions as well that clients didn't necessarily know that they needed. And ironically, it's often those that do best, because a client knows what their challenge is, but they don't always necessarily know how to tackle the challenge, particularly if there's not.
They'd want a faster horse.
They'd want a faster horse, exactly, rather than the car, exactly. And I'm a big believer in this single-minded vision as well. I'm slightly dodging the question, so I will answer in a second, but I'm a big believer in this sort of single-minded vision as well, which is that one of my favourite expressions is that a camel is a horse designed by committee. And what that means is that a horse is a beautiful animal designed by one person because they had a vision. It's got a lovely mane and a, you know, shiny, sleek coat and runs very fast and all that sort of thing. A camel is actually a far more practical animal. It can survive in deserts, it can in really hot temperatures, it can survive in really cold temperatures, it can survive without water for 40 days. It can eat pretty much anything. Yeah, it's pretty hideous. Sorry to any camel lovers out there. So you've ended up with something that's exceptionally practical, but not particularly beautiful. And I think it's a very important analogy to me in the business world, which is that I think you have to back your vision and build something that is beautiful and wonderful and really, really high quality for your clients. So the slightly more generic answer to your question is that we want to continue to develop on a service that is really good quality and usable for clients. I suppose the slightly more specific answer to your question is that we want to add further services and products to our kind of portfolio and our suite to try and increase the value for our clients. So we started with occupational health only, which is everything to do with kind of assessing people's fitness for work, their capacity to work, any adjustments they require, their compliance with the Equality Act and so on. We then started adding wellbeing services, as I've alluded to. So we've added things like counselling and physiotherapy and anxiety management and stress management and mental health first aids and things like that to our portfolio of services. So there's continuing along that path. There's adding more things into our suite that will help people's health. But of course, there's a slight tangent that you can take to that as well, which is to actually look at the wider picture and say, well, what are the greater challenges that businesses are facing when it comes to managing their people? And a lot of that is health related, but there are also non-health related challenges. So, or at least tenuously related to health. So high levels of absence, in doing so, some sort of absence management tracker or a leave booking system or an HR service or payroll service or whatever it could be. So it's trying to add in some of these sort of peripheral services that help to bring everything under one roof. So the very, very specific answer to your question is we're actually building something for free. So we're building something that we're going to give away for free, which is an absence management tracking tool. So every time you suffer an absence, one of your employees phones in sick, you can log that absence and it will start to prompt you with what you can do to support that employee, what you can do to help them. We're going to give it away for free, partially out of the goodness of our hearts and partially because it's a good marketing tool, and of course partially because it self-promotes as well, because it helps people to say, well, what can you do about it? Of course, what you can do about it is engage occupational health very well. So that's what the future looks like, I would hope. Hopefully I'll be sat here in 3 years' time and tell you, yeah, that went really well.
And as the business grows and evolves, where do you see yourself fitting within all of that?
Oh, I don't know. I certainly somewhere. You know, we've had multiple offers to acquire the business, which would invariably probably mean some form of departure for me from it, which I don't think I could face, in honesty. I think it all goes down to what is your objective, what's your goal? Why do most of us start businesses? Very few of us start businesses purely for financial gain. Obviously, it's a part of it. You know, we all need to put food on the table, but most of us want to build something. Most of us want to build something that we're proud of. So I want to continue to do that. Exactly in what capacity, I don't know. You know, as the team grows, I have more people around me who are helping us on that journey, but I will certainly wish to remain a part of it for the foreseeable, at least, anyway.
Okay. And is that your drive, to use the podcast name? Is that your drive, your motivation at the moment, is the building?
Yeah, it is. I see myself as a builder. I don't see myself as a businessman. I see myself as a builder, which I'm sure there'll be many people who deal with bricks and mortar who say, no chance, Harry. But I that's the way that I look at it. We're building something. So my drive is building something that supports us as a family. You know, I've got a wonderful wife and a very gorgeous little daughter who came along 10 months ago. So I want to build a nice life for them, but I also want to build a service and a product that helps the UK, and maybe even further afield one day. Who knows? But it's about building something brilliant that people love using, and that's, I think, what most of us do. A lot of us do it subconsciously, but I think anyone who's in business is doing that for one way or another, whatever industry you're in.
And has that changed? Because looking at the sort of the time frames, and obviously you wasn't a father at the point where you started the business. I don't know whether you was married or with your wife at that time. Your motivations and drive to think, you know what, I can do something better than this, I can start that. Has your drive and motivation evolved over the years, or is it still that same desire to just think, you know, I can build something here, do this? Or was there another drive to think, I'm going from employment, a nice, comfortable pay packet, and I'm getting into, shit, I might not have any money this month?
The desire to build something that I'm proud of has been there from day -1, you know, before I even started the organisation. I think being proud of what you do and what you build is absolutely fundamental. And if you're not doing something that you're not proud of, or that you're not proud of the idea that you've got, don't bother, would be my advice, because you're never going to be passionate about it and you're in it for the wrong reason. So yes, that drive, that motivation has never changed from day dot, and continues, and frankly it only gets stronger as well, because the more it's quite addictive seeing that you make a good impact on people and organisations. Helping is quite addictive. So the more we do, the more you want to do, and the more that you have that vision to say, well, actually, if we reinvest in this and build this, then we can help even more. And that doesn't, you know, we're not a charity. I've heard you say in the past, it's not, you know, you shouldn't be embarrassed to make a profit, and we're not a charity. We are a business, and we are intending to make a profit in doing so, but the two aren't mutually exclusive. You can do good and be a business. So that motivation remains very, very firm. The family element of it, of course, that develops over years, doesn't it? Because no, I wasn't with my wife when I first started the business, and no, I didn't have a daughter when I first started the business. But doing that only increases your drive. It also slightly changes. I don't know if you've experienced the same, perhaps not, I don't know, but it slightly changes your priorities and your decision-making process. And I probably, dare I say, it's slightly more risk-averse than I once might have been, because I can't, when I was by myself in a 2 up, 2 down, I could afford for everything to go wrong because, hey, what, you know, if I have to live on beans on toast, then I'll live. These days, if everything goes wrong, then I'm not just letting myself down, I'm also letting my family down. So you are different in your approach.
That's why I asked the question, because it does. Everybody outside of business, I can't think of an exception to this. I'm sure there are exceptions, but everyone I've encountered outside of running a business makes the assumption that it's a financial motivation behind an entrepreneur running a business. From my experience and speaking to other people who run businesses, financial motivation overall is quite low. Yeah, it is a desire to create something great.
Exactly.
Great.
We're builders.
And the barometer for that is often the money, is because money makes the world go round. Money is the enabler, but it's the intangible which is the motivation.
I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, it completely is. You know, obviously anything financial forms an aspect in it. You know, the truth is probably wouldn't be running the business if I didn't get paid. You know, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it pro bono, but I would probably do it for a lower salary than I take, for example. Which is still fairly minimal, to be honest, because it's not a motivating factor. And the second that I take a high salary or high dividends or anything out of the business is the second that I think that I would be worried for myself that I'm starting to do it for the wrong reasons. So I still, you know, I'm not the best paid person in the company by a reasonable stretch, actually, for example. It's certainly not the motivation. It's a motivation, but it's not, as you say, if there's a list of 10 things, it's probably 6th or 7th on the list.
I've loved chatting with you. The subject matter, the psychology behind much of what we spoke about is something that's personally fascinating to me. I've loved hearing the story of, well, first of all, the early days of getting your work ethic through to the journey of the business. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you for your time today. It's been a brilliant conversation.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed watching this interview. Please remember to hit subscribe and like. It really helps us with the algorithms for YouTube, and I'll look forward to bringing you more interviews in the next episode of Drive, the small business podcast from UKBF.